Hello world of YouTube and welcome to another discography review. Yes, consecutive months. Don't get used to it, because next year, while I pull things together, this isn't going to be a monthly segment. But this time, I ran a poll on Twitter, which I might do in the future, and threw up 4 bands to see which people wanted to hear the most from. And I pimped that poll out everywhere, and this band won by 1 vote, and that is who is without a doubt one of my favorite progressive acts to come out in the last 20 years, the Mars Volta. Now, I like other progressive metal acts, maybe a little more than the Mars Volta, but the Mars Volta hold a really special place in my heart. I didn't get into them as an offshoot of At the Drive-In. I got into the Mars Volta first in high school when I was really getting into progressive rock, and actually before that I had heard The Widow from Francis the Meat back in 2005, and I thought that song was really fucking cool. And so from that point I kind of slowly became really into this strange band of amazing, talented musicians. This comparison gets thrown around a lot, but it kind of makes sense. They're kind of the modern day King Crimson, not just because they are a revolving door of musicians, they are also just really good at writing really strange progressive rock. And that's one of the reasons why I love these guys. You know, and their discography isn't the easiest to get into, mostly because some of their records get really, really lofty, but that's kind of the point of the band, I feel like. And so in this video, I'm going to break down their 6 records, rank them, and give you some sort of footing to start from and branch off from there. Without further ado, let's get into it. So like all of these reviews, someone's got to be on the bottom, and it's not hard for me to put this here, but as always, or at least as I have been, I want to stress this is still a solid record. Octahedron I actually spent a lot when it first came out, but as the years have gone on, I've just listened to it less and less. And it like my other least favorite Mars Volta record, not that these are tied, but at the bottom 2, it's not lyrically cohesive because it's a non-concept album, but the one thing that also weighs this down, that doesn't weigh down their other non-concept album, is sonically this just isn't as compelling as the releases that came before it. While I really like a lot of the lyrical ideas and topics that they explore, I love the imagery on Cotopaxi. I really think With Twilight as My Guide is an incredibly compelling track written from the perspective of the Salem witch trials. I love the images of kidnapping and robbery that coat tracks like Halo of Nambituals. I just think a lot of the soundscapes and sounds aren't as fun. This record pulls back a lot of the jazzier nuance as far as like the arrangements and just keeps it stripped down to its core basics. A lot of guitar passages that have jazzier influences, but it's also packed with lots of drearier soundscapes on tracks like Teflon, which has a great middle section, but a lot of this record feels like the softer moments on their bigger records just spread out across an entire runtime. And again, not that that's a bad thing, this is still a pretty solid release. I just think it's 1, a bad representation of the Mars Volta, and 2, just not as fun to listen to. Like, I thought it was interesting when it first came out because it was pretty drastically different from what pockets I had heard of their sound before it, but it just wasn't as fun. So, yeah. This is more for those that have listened to their discography and kind of want something to sink their teeth into that's just a little bit different. If you like Nocturnicate, you'll probably like this record. Now, honestly, if you want an album to start with from the Mars Volta, you should honestly start with Amputexture. It's a great reflection of their sound and their core ideals as a band without getting weighed down by lofty concepts or thematic ideas or diving into theses upon forum posts of what an album can mean, or by an incredibly scary to look at track listing. This still has the sonic character of a Mars Volta record. If you want to hear them at their jazziest, at their wankiest, without being also at their most conceptual, you can't start anywhere worse than Amputexture. Even though it's my second least favorite Mars Volta record, I still really enjoy this thing. I love how this thing starts with Vicarious Atonement and Tetragrammaton, which just get fucking nuts! The brass and the guitar playing on this are just beautiful. I love the solos on Mecha Amputexture. John Frusciante kills this fucking record. A lot of his guitar playing, and you can tell it's him because it has that sound that he's done in the past, but it's so weird and it's so cool. I love a lot of the textures and a lot of the ideas that the band plays with on here, and even though a lot of the songs don't have an overarching concept, the titles do, some of the textures do, they all feel kind of still tied to something. It's just very loose. It's not as tightly woven as their golden age material, or as the records that I love more than this. So I feel like if you want any record out of the Mars Volta catalog to really bite into first that represents the band's sound, make it Amputexture. It's great. It's a fun listen. It's paced really well. Unlike my favorite record of the band, it has some moments of levity across these grand epics. The best one being Vermicide, which has this really darker guitar line and this really kind of straightforward songwriting between some of their most batshit insane moments on the record. Fantastic release, and a really good jumping on point. This is good. This is good. For prog fans only. If you have little interest in jazzier arrangements, you're still not going to like this. You'll probably like Octahedron more because it's a little more of just an experimental rock record. But this, just start here and then kind of work around the discography at your leisure. This was their last record, Nocturnicate, and I like it. I like that it still retains some of the sonic ideas done on Octahedron, but I feel like it's a little more harnessed, and I think it helps that there's themes and concepts reintroduced into the songwriting on this. It's inspired by Solomon Grundy and Hyancinthus. It's a Greek myth, and this is a good closing for the band. I mean, it doesn't feel as nuts as the rest of their material, but it still has a lot of the heart of a good Mars Volta record. Even while having this overarching sense of finality to some of the sounds, it still isn't afraid to get gritty at points and have some edge to it, which I really like. This thing doesn't overstay its welcome, and I feel like for a band like this, I think it was smart for them to kind of close out on this kind of note. And I think it's a testament to the sonic character that they could write this straightforward, more rock-centric styled record without losing any of the idiosyncrasies that they had well established in the career. Vedma Lady would fit perfectly on Bedlam and Goliath with its electronic textures and Cedric's soaring vocals, and Moloch Walker would fit beautifully in D-Louse in the Comatorium with its faster paced sound, even if it sounds more rooted in Octahedron's production than D-Louse did. It's still just, I fucking love this record, man. I like a lot of the melodies on this thing. I like a lot of the arrangements, and I love the guitar on this record. It's still very well put together. I love Omar's work on this. I think that the band feels the most restrained here than they ever have, but I don't think that's a byproduct of them trying to challenge themselves. It's more just they were feeling burnt out and they wanted to close out with a bang as opposed to just fizzling into nothingness. As far as where it fits in the discography, it's hard for me to outright recommend this record to start with, but I feel like if you're a fan of rock music and you don't like really out there production or jazzy influenced instrumentation, you'll like this more than some of their other work, because while I like that it's a little more straightforward in its structure, it's missing some of the nuance that their other parts of their career have. It's a good record to get to eventually, even if it's the last thing you listen to. I wouldn't make it the last thing you listen to, but get to it eventually. Maybe have it be a companion to Apputecture or one of my other recommendations for a starting point on this list. It's a good record, and it's one that fits in there. It's just a little more of a vignette than the rest of their Sonic character is. And it's just, even though out of many bands that have called it quits, I wish the Mars Volta would come back, I don't think this is a bad last album for them to have, personally. I feel like if you liked Apputecture and you want another record to kind of sink your teeth into, Deloused in the Comatorium isn't a bad next step. Or if you're an At the Drive-In fan and you want to get more into the Mars Volta, if you didn't necessarily jive at Apputecture, you will still probably like Deloused in the Comatorium, only because of some of the production touches that coat some of the songs. This acts as a good bridge between both of these bands. Even though it is a Mars Volta album by name, production touches and guitar lines on Inertiatic, ESP, Aratarka, and the closer Take the Veil Serpentax feel like they're still kind of fighting against their At the Drive-In tendencies, but conceptually, this is a prog album, and this is as weird as the rest of the Mars Volta catalog. It's about a guy in a coma, or dying from a coma after doing rat poison and morphine. It's fucking weird, and it has some of the idiosyncrasies of some concept albums with, like, instrumental interludes. It has this culmination to this big climax or third act big track of Cicatriz ESP, which is my favorite cut on the record. I love the movements on that. I love the guitar work on it. But it has other ideas outside of that link it more to the Mars Volta, like Drunk Ship of Lanterns, which has these bongos in it that dip into the Latin jazz nuance that this band really embraced as they continued making music. It's just kind of a tale of two ideas, and I feel like they both really work together. I feel like this would be a next step for the At the Drive-In to go to anyway, since they were already kind of a weirder, more complex post-hardcore band. At least that's how Relationship of Command presents the band as its final last hurrah. I fucking love that album too. I love a lot of this record, and I think that's why it's my third favorite record of this, but I think as far as progressive records go, it tells its story well. It has its themes of sinisterness done really well in the instrumentation, in the songwriting, in the composition of it. And that's one of the things I really like about this record that the Mars Volta carries throughout some of my other favorite records of theirs, is this sinister edge to their progressive music. And I fucking adore that, and I adore this record for that. Again, if you like At the Drive-In, start here. If you want to step up from Apputecture because you liked it, go here next. Now, I always liked this record once I got into the Mars Volta, but it wasn't until like 3-4 years ago that I fell in love with this record. I don't know what it was, but once it hooked me and I couldn't put it down, it just became my second favorite record of theirs. I love the sounds on this thing. I love how it kicks down the door with Aberrancula and then just transitions beautifully throughout the rest of the record. I think the transition from Aberrancula into Metatron is one of the best ever in music. It feels just flawless, and the rest of the record keeps that pace, keeps that tightness, keeps the flow so loose and just immaculate. The concept on this album is a little more loose. It's got thematics of a sinister nature. This album was kind of inspired by a Ouija board, and also a bunch of like messages from the soothsayer. It's a Mars Volta record. It's got a weird concept, but it's told in a way that's so very Mars Volta. It's done with themes and imagery, and the imagery on this is so great and so just, I don't know, unsettling. There's moments of this record where it feels very unsettling. The electronics on Ouroboros and Agadez really lend to that unsettling nature. Tourniquet Man's sound is in the same vein. And it's just eerie with a tight musicianship on here. And I love some of the electronic sounding textures that were on stuff like Francis the Mute, but done in a different light here. And it still has all of the nuance that you would expect from these guys. Only reason why I can't really suggest this as a good jumping on point, even though it has some of their catchiest melodies and songs in their career, like Goliath and Wax Simularica, and the melodies on Agadez and on the opener, it's not as tightly paced as some of the other records I recommended to start with. It's a good step up. It's a good step up, right up there with Deloused. If you like Deloused, maybe go here next, because it retains some of that sinisterness from there, only it's funneled through a different prism. It's hard for me to recommend this immediately. It's a great, again, second favorite record of theirs, one of my favorite prog records ever made, but not a good starting point, at least to me. I might be wrong. It's a good representation of how they write a concept album, because it's so loose and revolving around different ideas and images. I love how they take back the epics and just keep it full of compelling songs. They don't need to write movements. They don't need to write these operatic levels of grandness. They just write really tight songs that don't make you lose interest. This is just a good rock album that happens to have really weird lyrical allusions in it. So this is my jumping on point. As I said, I listened to The Widow around the time it came out, and I had heard other songs of theirs as the years went on, and I just fucking love this record. I love the balls that Mars Volta had to write a record like this. They wrote too much music. Not meaning that they wrote too much and didn't include it. They wrote too much and couldn't fit it all on there due to time constraints. Like, there's so much fucking music for this record, and it's all perfect. One of the most challenging, weird records I've ever heard. But not in a bad way. You know, this album, if you don't know, only has one song that's under 12 minutes long. And it's got 6 of them if you count the title track that's only a single. The Widow, which was the only single to come from this record, is a fucking tight-ass, catchy rock song between mountains of Latin brass and wanky guitar work and just so much jazz nuance. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. I love Francis the Mute, and its lyrics are a little more grand in scope. At least it feels that way with all of the shit going on in this record. There's fucking frogs chirping in this album. There's kids murmuring. There's ambient noise. There's so much shit the band put into this, and it's got the scope of a post-rock album mixed with the scope of a prog album with a lot of Latin jazz. This has even more Portuguese and other languages, and it's got a Western influence. It's got a Western twang. This almost feels like backdrops for Cowboy Bebop than it does just a prog rock album. It's got these really just menacing and sinister and crazy moments, like on the closer, Cassandra Gemini. The way that thing starts, it's just like stepping into a kaleidoscope and letting the band envelop you in these arpeggios and looping drums and madness while fucking Cedric just babbles into a microphone. There's so much madness here, but I can't recommend you start here, even though it's my favorite album, because it is such a challenging listen. If you're a progressive rock fan and you've never listened to Francis the Mute, listen to this first. I doubt you will be disappointed if you love progressive rock. You'll really respect the various movements and allusions to other prog bands like Cygnus, Visman Cygnus, obviously. you kind of know what that is pseudo related to, or at least in naming. There's a lot of just weird ideas on this thing. The album is inspired by this protagonist who finds this diary where the protagonist and the diary's life is reflective of the man reading it, and it leads him to find out his life is not at all what it was. It's weird. It's a Mars Volta record, and it's the most Mars Volta record that there ever probably will be. Villaquez, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, was in Guitar Hero 4, but it was like a trimmed 7-minute version. The full 12.5-minute version is amazing. I love the dichotomy of loud jazz and soft Latin jazz. There's like this nice split between like King Crimson and Santana meshed together. It's amazing. I spin this at least once a year because I love the ride it takes you on. I love how even the opening Cygnus, Vismut Cygnus, has this kind of roller coaster feel. It has like a really soft start, but then the way the drums sound with Cedric's voice, it sounds like you're kind of climbing up this this hill in a roller coaster before the Latin kicks in and you fall down and you're listening to the madness. They threw everything in the kitchen sink into the production studio, and I think it paid off for them beautifully. This is when the Mars Volta was fully realized on Francis the Mute. You know, like I said, Deloused is a great hybrid of At the Drive-In production touches with a more progressive tone and concept. But this, when all the Latin jazz came out, and they're singing in Portuguese, and they're talking about claymores, this is the Mars Volta. And this is what I love about this band. And it's encapsulated perfectly on their second record. This is how you write long records, in my opinion. You know, I always bitch about records being too fucking long. This is not an album that's too fucking long. This album is perfect in its structure. And actually, I have a playlist on Spotify featuring the first song. I've redacted this album and made it longer. And that's my spin on the Mars Volta. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I know I got a little fanboyish at points in here, but they're one of my favorite modern prog bands for sure, and probably one of my favorite prog bands to ever come into the scene. I just love how bold these guys are. I love how they write their music, and I love how they compose it. I love just the weird shit they do, and I commend them for the weird shit that they do. I know this isn't like as nuanced as other people talking about the Mars Volta have been, but this is me doing it. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you got a takeaway from this. I do plan on doing another discography review in February. I'll put up a poll in January asking who it should be on Twitter, so keep a lookout for that. If you have any bands you'd like for me to discuss or dissect on here, feel free to let me know. I have been Viral Rack. You guys have videos, lessons, situations, then I'll see you another day.